Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Turvey. I'm President and Executive Director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to a new season of J Talks Live. We are thrilled to kick off fall 2024 with a stellar panel of journalists and a timely and important discussion on covering history's most important election. I'd also like to extend a warm CJF welcome to the students at Humber College and Centennial College who are tuning in today from their journalism programs. We'd love to hear from you, so get those questions ready for our panel. While our gathering today is virtual, the Canadian Journalism Foundation's office is situated on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we are privileged to live and work in these territories. The CJF is grateful to our exclusive J-Talk series sponsor, TD Bank Group, for making another season of conversations about the vital role of media possible. Our thanks also extend to our in-kind supporter, Cision, and to CPAC, our broadcast partner for this event. You can learn more about our full season of J-Talks Live on our website by following us on social media. Our next event, Media Myths Debunked, will take place during Media Literacy Week on October 23rd, and we'll bring an international panel of public editors together to dispel common myths and misconceptions about the media. A reminder that our talk today is an hour long, and you can still submit questions for our speakers at any time via the tab on your screen. With just 47 days until the US presidential election, we continue to witness unprecedented dynamics unfolding almost daily. Even before President Biden's surprise announcement to exit the race, journalists were already grappling with the unique challenges of covering this election and navigating its impact on the media and the democratic process. Political polarization in the US is at an all-time high, and the events of January 6, 2021 are a stark reminder of just how deep those divisions run. And now, more than ever, voters are tuning into news outlets that confirm what they already believe. At the same time, the rise of disinformation, both in volume and sophistication, presents a threat to journalistic integrity, making it harder than ever for audiences to separate fact from fiction. All of these factors are forcing newsrooms to rethink in real time how they cover elections and in ways that foster trust. This discussion today goes beyond merely reporting on an election. It's about safeguarding the core principles of democracy and upholding the values that journalism stands for. We are honored to have an accomplished panel of journalists with us today, sharing their insights and expertise on how they continue to keep the public informed in these increasingly challenging times. Joining us from New York, he's one of our own and esteemed Canadian journalists, known for his sharp insight and analysis. It's Ali Velshi, chief correspondent at MSNBC and host of Velshi. He is also a weekly economics contributor to NPR's Here and Now. In Washington, D.C., Kadia Goba covers Congress, Kamala Harris, and the 2024 presidential race for Semafor. This summer, she moderated a widely publicized interview with former US President Donald Trump at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference. Also in DC, Jackson Proskow joins us. He's the Washington bureau chief for Global National. And to lead our conversation, we are thrilled to welcome Angela Murphy, the Globe and Mail's foreign editor. The Canadian Journalism Foundation takes great pride in bringing together these leading voices in journalism to contribute to today's conversation. Angela, it is my honor to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very excited about this event. I think I'm just going to start with a little bit of a look back. I remember around the time of the primaries, people were kind of saying, oh, it's going to be a boring election. It's the same old Trump versus Biden. And then that changed pretty quickly. And it's been anything but ho-hum since the primaries. So I just thought I'd start by asking the panel, what has been like the most surprising moment so far? And I know there's many to choose from. Maybe I'll start with you, Ali.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. This is how you know it's actually me and I haven't been stolen by aliens, because I do that, and I've done it for the last 3 years. I start talking, not unmuted. But it's good because it gave me a couple extra seconds to think about it, because there's been so much that's surprising. Part of it is, Joe Biden leaving the race, Kamala Harris, the speed with which she got into that race and claimed all the territory within hours, literally, because in the moments after Joe Biden fell out, there was a lot of talk about Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom of California and others, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who might be in the race. But she got in, she owned it, and there's been a remarkable social media and sort of sense of enthusiasm around her. That's number one. Number two, Donald Trump and the unusual nature of his campaign, which is getting weirder and weirder by the day. But here's what I'll say. By virtue of the gathering that we've got today, the thing that is surprising me most, and I think we have to catch ourselves, because people keep on saying, is the media doing what it did in 2016 with Hillary Clinton's emails? We're doing something called sane washing now, in which Donald Trump delivers these unhinged rants about dead birds and being electrocuted and being eaten by sharks and all sorts of unrelated things in answer to questions, sometimes at a rally, but sometimes in answer to a question about a policy matter. And journalists feel compelled to explain what he probably meant or what his policy actually is on these matters, as opposed to saying, that was weird. He was asked about childcare policy in a room full of economists, and he gave a really weird answer about increasing tariffs on China that had nothing to do with the answer. But so this is the challenge for journalists in this very moment, where voting has started in some states already. Are you going to report on what's actually happening, or are you going to report on what you think should be happening? Because what you think should be happening in this election is definitely not happening. This is very unusual stuff, and we've got to be a little more nimble at how we cover it.
Yeah, I agree. We'll talk a bit more about the misinformation flying around. Kadia, what would you say has been the biggest surprise for you so far?
Yeah, I would say when Joe Biden stepped down, I think probably the initial reaction and all the uncertainty within the Democratic Party about who would be his replacement. I talked to a lot of leaders who said, of course it's going to be Kamala Harris. But to me, it was very surprising to not have, all these different opinions about whether or not there was going to be a mini open primary, and the question of whether it should be and whether who would lead in that primary. I thought that was shocking. And it was, I don't know, it felt very unstable on how we hold our elections. And I just thought, I just assumed that we would be a little more prepared for that. Obviously, as Ali talked about, everyone coalesced around Kamala Harris and everything was fine. But that initial reaction and how sitting lawmakers had no clue who was going to be the next person in the line was very shocking to me. And it was interesting to report out.
Yeah, the so-called founding fathers left a few things out. Hey.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not only the speed that everyone coalesced around Kamala Harris, but it's also this idea that just by virtue of not being Joe Biden, she automatically got a 5-point bump, right? And it's like this idea that Americans are enthusiastic, not about the election, just about having a different set of choices out there. And it may not have ultimately mattered in that moment when Joe Biden stepped aside that it wasn't Joe Biden. It might just be the idea of having somebody younger, more vibrant, fresh face, the idea of shaking up the race. But I am absolutely stunned by the speed at which Kamala Harris, just by virtue of not being Joe Biden, managed to pick up that amount of support out of the gate. And now it, of course, is picked up because we're in a post-debate space. People are getting to know her. They're getting to see her under pressure. They're getting a better sense of what she stands for. The numbers are increasing. But just out of the gate that she picked up that polling advantage, it was really remarkable.
Okay, so nobody mentioned either assassination attempt, which is cool. Like, you have your own views. I can't ignore it, though. That this thing happened again just this past weekend. And one thing that I noticed that made the difference between the first attempt in Pennsylvania and then this most recent alleged attempt, I mean, the guy hasn't been convicted yet, is the fact that after the first one, there was a pause in the rhetoric. There was some thoughtfulness, like, okay, what are we doing here? Is violence being incited? How we need to calm the temperature down. But after the second attempt, it was almost immediate that Trump and Vance and others started in on the rhetoric that immediately blamed Harris and Biden for what had happened to him. And I just wondered, like, has the rhetoric been too inflammatory on both sides? Who wants to talk to that? Maybe I'll start with you, Kadia.
Yeah, I can start. Sure. Yes, both sides. I mean, I think Republicans are guilty of this just a bit more. But yeah, Republicans are now pointing out some things that Democrats are saying, suggesting or saying that Donald Trump is a threat to society or to democracy. And I think I'm not sure why that is problematic in so much that, you know, he was impeached for trying to overturn an election. So I feel like Democrats are kind of calling it like it is. But I have to say, Republicans I talk to say a lot of them feel like they missed an opportunity on the first. I know this sounds so chaotic, but on the first assassination attempt, and you know, it kind of died down really quickly, and probably having a lot to do with Kamala Harris in the race and all the publicity and media coverage that she got. And some of them felt like this was a missed opportunity for them to kind of, you know, reel in on Democrats and, you know, blame them for it or take the spotlight away from Donald Trump. So I think there's a more concerted effort, as insane as that sounds, around making this a messaging point moving forward and not letting it die in the news cycle so quickly. I think this is a conscious effort on Republicans to do that.
Wow. But that does not take the temperature down.
Yeah, it doesn't, right? It reincites. I mean, I think Democrats are sort of handling it well, like kind of not feeding into that. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with this missed opportunity the first time. When I talk to members privately, they all say that, you know, oh, we're surprised that you guys didn't cover that, you know, more. So.
Okay. Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it wasn't on my surprise list just because the temperature in this country for a very long time has been so heated. And you talk to anybody who sort of plays in the extremism research community, and they'll tell you this is exactly what they've been worried about, these sort of lone wolf actors inspired by rhetoric. I am surprised. I think that Republicans heading into the Republican convention put so much effort into talking about how Donald Trump was going to emerge, this changed man. There'd be this whole new tone. Trump himself tried to set the stage for that and said he would only recount the assassination attempt one time during his acceptance speech, and that'd be it. He'd never talk about it again. And that all vanished within 24 hours of the convention wrapping up. And it was back to same old Donald Trump, right? And he's not lowering the temperature. And then on top of that, you've got both him and J.D. Vance actually leaning in to the most extreme rhetoric from within their own party and within their own minds. Look at what's happening in Springfield, Ohio, where, you know, the false claims about Haitian immigrants who are in the country legally are being completely debunked in terms of, you know, these allegations of eating pets. That's all gone out the window. Wall Street Journal has a report today that the woman who filed the original police report has recanted. She found her cat hiding in the basement. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are still leaning into this, and I think it's only going to get worse. That's the sort of unfortunate part of all this.
Yeah. And Ali, I'll give you a little chance to answer this one too.
You know, you're right. I'm also not in the surprised category, but I do lean more into the idea that the reason I'm not surprised is because there's a lot of violence and a lot of guns in this country. And so they become seen as solutions to people. But neither of these assassination attempts were as politically driven, as far as we know at this point, as you would think. It's not a Democrat trying to kill. You know, these things are all more complex, and they have more to do with the kinds of people who attend school shootings or do that. They've all got really big guns that, you know, regular gun owners don't typically have or carry around, and it's stochastic violence. Now, it's not unique to the United States. Obviously, in the United Kingdom, there's a great deal of stochastic violence born out of disinformation targeting immigrants of color. So it happens. But But I almost feel like I want to separate the idea that there are a whole lot of anxious, angry, perhaps not stable people in the United States with assault weapons who can do this sort of thing. So it doesn't take much. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that it's not related to political discourse and the level of the temperature. I'm saying this is the release valve that we have in America. People have weapons, and when they are frustrated or not, have their wits about them, they use them. I almost think this is more of this remains more of a gun problem than a politics problem, and yet we've got a remarkable politics problem as well that we have to solve.
At the same time. Yeah, I hear you. I have a question from an audience member that I think fits into this discussion, and it's more about how we report on it. When people are spewing like misinformation and frankly lies, how do we report on that without amplifying it? This is the question that I think we're all struggling with. I don't know, Ali, do you want to go first on this one?
I think you're right. We struggle with it all the time. All the time. I think I probably struggle with this question more than any other question. And I'm evolving into a place that says not discussing it is not the option. Repeating the lie and then putting it out there to get solved is not the option, hoping that the crowd will solve it. So I have become much, much more deliberate about the fact that I will tell you what was said, and we'll evaluate whether or not I let that be told in Donald Trump's words, meaning you listen to him actually saying it, or I give you some short form version of it. You have to be careful that you are not going to incite violence by doing it. You're not going to further a meme. You're not going to allow somebody to cut what you said and edit it, disingenuously to suggest that you are saying that that's what's going on, but that you debunk it. If you are not prepared to debunk it now, you have to go one step further than you used to be. You used to be able to say, this is empirically a lie. Now you have to be able to say, this is a lie, and here's a little bit of my long homework. I think that's a little different for all of us and the space that we have and the media that we work in. But fundamentally, we're not just fact checkers. We all should be. Every single journalist in the world that can't get past the fact that they are a fact checker. But beyond being a fact checker, you now have to be prepared to be a little bit of a debater yourself in the interest of truth. Don't debate people's policies, but say, here's why this is just not true. That's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week, Jackson, that like part of the problem is the media itself, the time allowed for each story. We run into this, like you've only got so many words or so many minutes, and it's hard to do that debunking.
Yeah, it's sort of this idea that sometimes context is lacking because there isn't time to give context.
Right.
I do think, though, we're getting better as journalists at understanding the amount of information and the way people are consuming that information. And they probably know the backstory by the time they're tuning into a newscast like mine or Ali's at night or reading Kadia's work. And so what are you giving them that's extra? What are you giving them that's value added to actually understand what they have already heard out there? So this week, as an example, with this second Trump assassination attempt, we tracked down a guy who worked with this guy or came across him in Ukraine and kind of got a picture of the guy's mental health, that he was walking around with a sandwich board as an unauthorized recruiter for the Ukrainian army and trying to defraud foreign fighters. That's a valuable piece of information because that in itself contradicts the narrative that is circulating in some circles that this guy was a Ukrainian agent out to get Donald, right? I think that's where we can do more good than harm in terms of debunking disinformation.
Yes. And Kadia, what do you think we could be doing better maybe? Right?
I don't have a ton to add, but obviously stating the facts, and then you gotta fact check. Where this becomes difficult is in live situations, right? Like when you're interviewing a candidate, and if you don't have an earpiece in your ear with producers behind you, that gets very difficult. But in general, I have the luxury of thoroughly doing that before, thoroughly fact checking and, putting down the facts, debunking what the so-called person, the lie that the person said, and, clarifying it. I have the luxury of doing that, because I'm writing as opposed to doing a live broadcast. But yeah, it's very difficult. It's a job many people who study journalism don't sign up for. And I'm curious if that's being taught in news literacy and things like that are being on both sides, right? News literacy for people reading the information, but also emerging journalists, if that's being taught in the classes now. It is a new dynamic of journalism as someone who's fairly new to the industry, and slowly evolving as we figure this out.
Angela, if I could just add to that, the live component is the difficult part, right? Because let's just take Donald Trump, for example, where he gives where he's talking about pets, people taking your pets and eating them. You could probably know that that's a lie, but you can't, right? You can't report it's a lie until you understand a little bit of the context. And the context is, where was this reported? What was going on? The New York Times did a great series on migration into Springfield, Ohio, and how that triggered a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. And then you combine that with old debunked rumors about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs. And then you talk about whether people's pets were missing or whether they were stray cats and whether they were real geese or dead geese. It's who's got time for this? And not only do you have time for it, but in the moment that it's being said, how do you debunk it? So Donald Trump says at a debate that Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio are eating people's pet dogs and cats. Turns out virtually no piece of that was true, except that there are migrants in Springfield, Ohio. But while you know that no part of that is true, I've never studied people eating people's pet dogs and cats. Right? I haven't studied that. I don't know what the situation is in Springfield, Ohio about cats. One might have known that, but generally speaking, most people don't know that. And so the live component of it is really hard. A day later, you can tell a really good story about where this came from, why it's debunked, why it's nonsense.
Yeah. ABC did the best they could, I think, by just being ready for that question.
It is hard in those moments. And they did. On a particular topic, they did do it immediately. But the lying with velocity challenges live television.
It challenges us as people, for sure. We're getting some great audience questions, so I'm going to veer off of mine for a minute and someone asked, how do we make this election relatable for Canadians? I think that's an excellent question. So who should I start with? Maybe Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Canadians are painfully conscious of the fact that they share a very long border with the US, and what happens in the US has impacts back in Canada. And I also think, our audience is somewhere between deeply worried by what's going on in the US, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, but also deeply fascinated by it, right? And it's not so much that you have to work super hard to make it relatable. I think Canadians just want, as a general sense, a high-level view of what's going on. What are these issues that are cropping up? Why do they matter to Americans? And yeah, there's sometimes, I think, that sense amongst Canadian audiences that they're living in a house that's next door to the house that's on fire. And there's a little bit of a curiosity factor there too, right?
Yeah.
The house next door to the house on fire is a good analogy, because growing up in Canada, it was important to know about everything the United States was doing, because it was your biggest trading partner, because that's where jobs were created with the Auto Pact and then free trade and then NAFTA. But it's something much more than that now. It's not just that the house is on fire. It's that the smoke's coming in to you, right? You're getting the smoke. And the smoke is infecting Canadian politics and Canadian discourse. And every time I'm in Canada, and I'm there a lot, I'm talking to groups, I encourage Canadians to not let the reins go on this, not let it happen to Canada. Discourse in Canada, journalism and discourse in Canada is substantially more sane than it is in most of the United States. Keep it that way. Fight for that. Don't let the polarization set in. It's setting in a lot of places in the world. It's not a uniquely American situation, but it is less in Canada than it is in the United States. A lot of Canadians tell me that I'm delusional in thinking that, but I don't think I am. I think the temperature is lower. Try and really work hard to keep it lower.
And Kadia, just, Kamala Harris has got connections to Canada, like a lot of them, actually. She lived here for a while as a young person, a child. And but she doesn't really talk about it that much. And I kind of was wondering at the convention, a lot of the times when she was talking about her childhood, the word Canada never came up. But
she doesn't talk about a lot. I mean, sorry. She doesn't talk about a lot. I don't think that is surprising anymore, probably to her detriment. But I was just going to expound off of specifically not Canada, but like globally, right? We saw a lot of right-leaning leaders turn more right wing after the emerging of Donald Trump, and sort of mirroring this thing. And now we do this global thing on Semafor, and the parallels are really interesting, and how some of this rhetoric or this ideology is repeated. And some people seem to have, or a lot of leaders seem to have, like this permission structure he's created. I think Trump has created this permission structure, and we see a lot of this all over the world now. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. But to Ali's point, be careful not to let it seep into Canada.
Oh, I mean, just to jump back in on Ali's point, I often caution people who sort of and Canadians who smugly look at what's happening in the US and say, look, I think Canada on a lot of these things is 18 to 24 months behind. It's coming. So pay attention.
Yeah. And by the way, to Kadia's point about Kamala Harris not talking about being Canadian, it's a trap. That's the problem. Anything you say here is a trap. The Republicans some people have tried to use that. They're telling you that it's like a birther thing, right? She's born in Canada. And she is actually, for all the enthusiasm and people supporting her of different groups, because there's a group of, every kind of people for Harris who does a Zoom call and, was breaking Zoom and raising money. She doesn't lean into identity as much as some of her supporters think she does. And I don't mean that as a criticism. She just wants to be your president. That's how she's campaigning. I want to be a president for all Americans. Remember at the convention, all these people talked about breaking glass ceilings? She didn't. She didn't. No. Hillary Clinton said, you know what I see through the cracks in the glass ceiling? I see you're the first woman president. That's not the stuff that Kamala Harris talks about. She just wants to be the president. If you'd like her to be the first Asian president, or the first Black president, or the first president who grew up in Canada, that's on you. And you can vote for that if you want. But
she's not labeling herself.
She doesn't lean into it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that it's often the detriment to a person of color, or especially a Black person. We saw this with Obama, right? Largely impeded by this whole the birther thing, right? But yeah, she's not identifying as Black. There's been some criticism about that, and she's not overly talking about being Asian, or a woman for that matter. So it is, I think she sees that, to his point, as sort of a handicap and a thing that Republicans will criticize her for, or to say that she's leaning on identity politics to win an election.
Yeah, they'll find things to criticize for sure. There's another great question here, and it is kind of interesting to me. So the whole Haitian thing, I mean, there's no excuse for lies about Haitians, but the whole migrant issue, like Trump has managed to pull that out of his hat and make it such a huge thing. And in a way, like, didn't the Democrats kind of leave that door open to him, like by not dealing with the border sooner?
But everybody has, right? Nobody in America for 40 years has properly dealt with this issue. Comprehensive immigration reform has evaded America for a long time, very poorly. I mean, it's benefited Canada, by the way, generally speaking, because America is just so disorganized about this stuff. America desperately needs immigrants. America also has a border issue that needs to be confronted. Everybody, whether you like immigrants or you don't like immigrants, everybody agrees that you should have a door on your border, and you should control whether it's open to immigrants or not open to immigrants, or how many it is. And America's not done that very well. Didn't do it well under Trump, didn't do it well under Biden, didn't do it well under Obama or Clinton or Bush or anybody. So we are now faced with the idea that, unlike immigration policy, which we should all be talking about, every country should be talking about immigration policy, it's become border policy in America, right? We're all worried about securing the border and how scared you are of the border and how close you are to the border, and how ultimately how scared you are of immigrants. I live in New York. We're not close to that border. We're close to a different border.
It's our border.
we got nothing but immigrants in this country, and we fully understand, when I look out my window, that if the immigrants go away, our economy will grind to a halt. Different discussion that we're not having. So everybody's to blame for being bad on immigration. Republicans have just taken it to a whole nother level in terms of the disdain that we actually have for these immigrants, many of whom we quite desperately need.
Yeah. Kadia, did you want to speak to this one?
Sure. I mean, in particular, the framing that has come out of the immigration or border crisis, right? It is, taking people's jobs and, for the sake of winning an election right now. And I have to say, I'm from New York. I talk to people in New York City. Some of them are very frustrated with the with illegal immigrants, that migrant people that have come there because they've been convinced that the resources are being taken from them and given to migrant people that are staying there. And these are people that, like, I grew up with, childhood friends. And I think that's very interesting how well that point is going across or coming across or hitting people that you won't suspect. The whole black jobs thing that Trump keeps talking about, you laugh about it and, it wasn't PC or properly formed, but there is a general concern, and they are convincing, as a candidate, he has been able to convince people that they are less than because of the migrant issue.
It's wild what's being thrown around out there. Jackson, what is your thought on the migrant issue? I mean, some people are saying now Canada's border might become more of an issue.
I mean, I think so. There's a couple of things going on. One, there's an effort to conflate legal migration and illegal migration in the U.S., right? So when you're talking about Springfield, most of the 20,000 Haitians who settled there are actually legal migrants to the country and had a right to settle there. And yet the conversation is now veered when you bring that up. Well, why were they allowed to settle there in some circles, which is just, you're essentially talking about restricting freedom of movement of people who are legally in the country. But to Ali's point, 30, 40 years of successive governments have tried or not tried and failed to deal with this issue. So it should be no one's surprise that this continues to be a problem.
Yeah, it's going to be an important one going forward. I think that makes me think too. I mean, Harris is doing well in the polls, and some people are really think, oh, it's going to be a sweep. But I keep saying, well, we do have the Electoral College and the swing states still matter. And I'm just worried, like, do you think maybe we're not seeing it clearly? Like, are we reacting to what happened in 2016 when we didn't see Trump as like a viable candidate, even though he ended up winning? It was kind of on the media, right? Well, a lot of people pointed the finger.
I think they're different mistakes, and some of them are just basic statistics, right? And an understanding of polling. And because the Electoral College doesn't ever match or has not matched for many presidential cycles the popular vote, you realize over time that the polling also is a mismatch. In other words, there's an advantage given to one side in the polling, such that in order for the Democratic president to prevail in a swing state, they have to be polling substantially ahead of the Republican, outside of the margin of error. So right now, what you've seen is Biden and Trump were head-to-head, but Trump was ahead of Biden in the swing states, generally speaking, but it was all within the margin of error. Now Kamala Harris is ahead of Trump, generally speaking, still within the margin of error. So the trend is on her side, there's no question, but she's not broken free. Now, the thing in America is that elections tend to be very close, and the difference between winning by a bit and winning by a landslide is also actually very close because of the Electoral College. So if you win one extra state, you've gone from a squeaker into a landslide. I would say if you're a betting person at this moment, the winds are behind Kamala Harris. Voting has begun in the United States, but I will also tell you 40 plus days is a long time and lots of things happen. This president is having one assassination, this former president having one assassination attempt every 2 months. I mean, it's a terrible thing that's stuff we even mentioned, but the dynamics can change very quickly. You got Israel and Palestine, you've got Ukraine and Russia, and you've got things you're not even thinking about that are going on in the world, let alone in the United States. So I would not
all bets are
off this ball.
Kadia, what do you think? You think we'll know on November 6th?
I mean, we don't have what we had in 2020 with a lot of mail-in voting, although I think that will increase from 2016. But I mean, it's hard to do like predictive polling or predictive analysis or reporting, right? Because there's just doesn't pan out. What I've been trying to do is, along with watching the polling, which all of us, every 4 years seem to keep getting burned on, I've been trying to understand pathways, right? And at least to report out how each candidate sees their option of winning, right? Whether it's Kamala Harris focusing in on Philadelphia or Atlanta, those urban cities, or trying to, making sure that Trump doesn't trip away at that, or trying to go to places like Asheville, which is surrounded by a bunch of red counties, and, which probably have some Democrats in there, but they see once you're going to Asheville, you'll probably, maybe attract some swing voters or some people who are on the cusp if you're just showing up. So I've been trying to just focus on what their pathways are, how they're approaching those pathways, and talking to like chairs, so people are on the ground and, actually talking to would-be constituents of either one of them.
Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, Harris has more pathways through the Electoral College than Trump does at this point, right? Like Trump, it's basically Pennsylvania or bust at this point. But yeah, I think we're all super, super cautious about polling now. And I think the sort of unanswered question, and I've talked to pollsters about this, and they don't really know how to answer, is what is polling missing today? Who are you not capturing? Who are you not hearing from? And it's almost become that the focus groups and the vibes are almost in many ways more indicative of what's going on out there right now, right? So who's got the ground game? Who's got the enthusiasm? And then I think the whole other piece of this is, say everything goes smoothly, what is the aftermath? What does the vote counting look like? And Pennsylvania is the big example here, right? Where Republicans through the legislature in the state have refused to allow the counting of any mail-in ballots until Election Day, which means the results from Pennsylvania are going to be delayed. And there's this same thing happening in Georgia and in Arizona and Nevada, where there's an attempt to sow doubt about the process before the process has even really gotten underway. And back to our previous question, poll out last week, 65% of Republicans are worried that large numbers of illegal immigrants are going to vote in the election and skew the results. So these are all the things that have to be overcome, even if we get a clean, straightforward result on election night, which I'm certainly not convinced of.
No. Yeah, it was more than a week last time before this.
Yeah, just Pennsylvania is not built mechanically to be able to do that anymore if it's close, because they count overseas ballots, they count military ballots at a certain time, they have postmarked dates, so they allow ballots to come in later. So if Pennsylvania, and it probably is one of 3 to 4 states that we'll be looking most closely at, Pennsylvania and Georgia may not deliver. Georgia may still, but Pennsylvania, I think there's very little chance you will have the result out of Pennsylvania. And frankly, without the result out of Pennsylvania, you cannot have a presidential result. So I hope it's not 12 days, but I don't think it's going to be election night.
Yeah. There's some talk, especially since the second assassination attempt, like the fears of violence post-election day seem to be even greater now. Do you guys think we should be prepared for that? Maybe Kadia, do you want to start?
Yeah, as someone who was in the Capitol hiding behind a chair in the House chamber on January 6th, I would say, yes, I think everyone is preparing for a contentious January 6th or post-election period. It contributed. It doesn't help that the former president is actually already sowing doubt about the election. As he just pointed out, a certain part of the electorate understanding that illegal migrant people are actually voting. So all of those things, yes. And to be honest, I've talked to Republicans who say one of their biggest fears is that this is a great quote, if Donald Trump loses, his biggest fear is that he will lose. Something like January 6th will happen, and then they all have to act like they still like him. So yeah, this is even a concern on the Republican side.
My goodness. Yeah. Jackson?
Yeah, I don't think we can underestimate the risk of that for sure. Again, I think it's more much like we've seen with these attempted assassinations, where it's lone wolf actors who are angry or inspired by rhetoric. But yeah, I mean, take your cue from the fact that the Secret Service has now this time designated January 6th, the certification day, as a national special security event, which is the same level of security you would have seen for the political conventions in the summer. So the fences are back, the high security is back, all that stuff.
Can you imagine like a date that nobody even knew mattered or existed is now this? And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. The other thing for a Canadian audience to think about is we talk about these militias. I mean, there's lone wolves and there's organized group. In the middle is these militias. You know, it's not a thing, right? It's not, you can't be a member of a militia in the United States. What used to be militias, the way it was construed in the Constitution, became the National Guard. If you feel like you would like to take up arms in defense of your, you know, the place in which you live, you're under control of the governor, and you can only take up arms as an organized group, either as a member of the military, as a law enforcement officer, or as a member of the National Guard. Can't be a militia. You can have a gun club where you ride around with uniforms and pretend that you're protecting people, but that's not actually a legal thing. However, there are lots of people who belong to these so-called militias in the United States who have guns, who think that there's some kind of war that they're fighting, and they're rebels without a cause at the moment, and that Donald Trump has helped become their cause in the last few years. So, you know, Donald Trump, remember, said stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. That's the kind of thing you have to watch out for. There are people.
Both groups have Canadian members too, and one of them was founded by a Canadian, right?
Not legal for Canadians or Americans to be part of this, but okay.
But on that same note, like maybe Kadia, are you worried about your safety as a journalist? This is a question
on January 6th. Yeah,
just in general too, like over the course of the election.
No, as someone who took part in 2020 rallies and, you know, kind of, and still go to rallies now, Trump rallies, I should say, to cover them. It's always a little concerning when the former president points at the media and starts, you know, calling us fake news and, you know, just lying about us, and, you know, the crowd just redirects their attention. Closer to the election, it gets a little dicey, you know, people feel a little more emboldened, but in general, I don't necessarily feel like I'm, you know, that there's a threat. I mean, yes, do I get hate mail a lot? Do I get, you know, angry messages all the time on Twitter? Sure. But I think my biggest concern is going to be like, how do we cover January 6th, 2025? I, you know, just brought that to my newsrooms, the attention to my newsroom the other day, because I'm not sure how we do that. But we have to do it, right? We have to cover it.
We do. And it's interesting you say that, because I work with foreign correspondents who wear flak jackets and helmets when they go to protests. And yeah, like, are we getting to that point within the United States?
Unfortunately, I can't say I cover a ton of protests actually, but just DC, I do a lot of Beltway reporting, so I don't cover a lot of protests.
Yeah. It's just these people going around Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, out in the field, I certainly see my American TV colleagues who are, you know, visible and known to an American audience, all traveling with security now, right? And even at the political conventions, inside a secure zone, the big network faces have private security with them inside a secure area. So I think that kind of tells you where the level of concern is.
Wow.
Nobody knows me down here, for the record. So.
Okay, but still, you're wearing a press jacket or something.
In all seriousness, it is concerning, and those events and protests and that do have the potential to get out of hand. I mean, it's something we're painfully conscious of.
I'll say that it's a little different for me, and that is, there was some Trump supporter somewhere put out a list of 377 entities and individuals who should be arrested and prosecuted under a Trump administration. And I was quite surprised to have made the list. Like, I don't think the top 377 of anything. But it's the concept, not just of the stochastic random violence that might occur in a crowd or in a protest or even target you. It's the idea that this is what we have to think about, that we are doing things that other countries have done, in which journalists are either generally, as Kadia says, or hyper-specifically targeted. And it is stochastic because maybe this list will go somewhere, and maybe Donald Trump, as president, will decide he's going to go down that list and start prosecuting those people. There's all sorts of members of Congress on there, other media people. It's not like anything special being on that list. Or maybe the list just floats out in the ether and people take on their response. Terrorist organizations do this, right? They just put these names out. They put these target list names. Doesn't mean they're going to get you. It means if anybody wants to take care of this themselves, like a fatwa, basically. So I think there's also that. There's this idea that times may be tough for journalists, and that's okay. We sign up for that. But are we going to have any kind of organized effort by a government or its entities or its allies or its supporters to undermine journalists and their safety? That's going down a completely different road than what we're used to.
It's also hard to get accredited for Trump events if you're not a journalist for the right organization. Right. And maybe it's, different for people who are already on the list. But I took students to their primaries, and getting accredited is almost impossible. So I don't know. Maybe I will see that media circle tighten if it is Trump in the end. I'm not sure. It's about controlling the message.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of? Well, I'm going to say maybe rephrase this. Can you win this election on social media? Kadia, do you want to speak to that one?
I hope not.
Good answer.
Going back to everything, coupled with everything we just said, I want to add misinformation as another form of another entity that is stoking a lot of, the rhetoric and fear that we see. Also, I want to preface, most of the stuff I'm saying is coming through the lens of a print reporter. My TV colleagues have a little bit more, are perceived that, or have more aggression or deal with more aggression than I do. And Jackson is right. Casey Hunt definitely had a security team at the RNC. But back to your question. No, people should just read more. They should, have news literacy and understand what they're getting their news from, and Twitter is very different now from 4 years ago, right? There's a blue check. Those used to be actual journalists or people who wouldn't just spew lies, we hope. Now you can just pay $8, I think, a month, and anyone has it. You don't even have to have a picture. You can be just a troll. So no, I hope this isn't one on social media. I hope most people are not looking at social media for their news, but I can't say that it's not happening.
Yeah. Jackson?
Yeah, I just think we can't underestimate the social media to BS to mainstream pipeline that's out there. An example of it today, there's a Trump rally happening on Long Island, and a producer for a far-right TV network down here put out a claim that police had found explosives and a suspect had run off into the bushes. And it wasn't long until that was picked up by the Daily Mail and going nuts on Twitter. And it took about 2 hours for the police to come out and say, completely bogus, not true. But that there is a large segment that picked that up in the first place that has tuned out the fact check, the fact that that's not true, and they think it's another legitimate threat against Trump.
Yep.
That's what we're up against.
Ali, what do you think?
I'm just looking at the patterns. So when Kadia talks about the pathways that the candidates believe they have, look at where they're going. In addition to the Philadelphias and the Atlantas, Kamala Harris is going to places in slightly more rural Georgia, or places where where Democrats have not won in the past. She's doing the same thing in North Carolina. She's doing the same thing in Pennsylvania. She's going into Luzerne County and Cambria County, places that Democrats lost by a lot in the last election. So that's not social media, right? That's the
ground game.
That's the ground game. So clearly Kamala Harris's team, and I don't have any access to them that anybody else doesn't have, seems to think that this is going to be won by people meeting people going to cafes and diners, and people knocking on doors. When people ask the campaign what they can do, they want to help Kamala Harris get elected. Obviously, the first thing they want is money. But if it's not money that you can have, or you've given the money, they want you to go knock door to door or phone bank. So tells me that they think this election is actually going to be won the way elections have traditionally been won, which gives me some faith, because I do think that we're not ready for, or maybe we're past the point that social media can be helpful to a functioning and healthy democracy.
Yeah, I'm just like, last night I read a piece, I think it was Microsoft, that actually revealed that there was a viral video of Kamala Harris that was created by the Russians that I forget, it showed her this crazy hit and run fake news story that was out earlier, was actually, they have determined, was made by a Russian bad actor. So that's kind of why I went on the social media topic. And I guess as journalists, like, I guess if we're not each of us, but somehow are on our team, do you feel like we need to have someone covering social media?
Just that? There's like a whole segment of people who are just way too online that are not necessarily the ones that are swinging elections, right? And yeah, I mean, it's a wild trip to talk to them. It's good to talk about, I guess, but I also think you have to sort of be grounded in what is your average baseline viewer or reader hearing and understanding, and what do they know to be true, as opposed to giving oxygen to much like
but it did like, you could argue that it affected Hillary's campaign last time, because some of the fake things that were put out by Russians and from Moldova, etc., like there was some crazy pickup on that. I mean, BuzzFeed did a big expose.
Yeah, I think, you know, what Jackson was talking about what happened out in Long Island is interesting. The channel from conspiracy theorists to mainstream is the only thing I think that is something that should be concerning to us, right? I think if there are people who are way too online, and that's a whole separate problem, how we're going to figure that out, how we're going to figure out how many people get bad information and how to deal with that, and that's global. But there is, and when Alex Jones was prominent, this was a very common thing. Things would be on 4chan and 8chan. They'd be completely wacky stuff that had no credibility and no sources. They'd make it onto Alex Jones's show or one of the other right-wing hosts, and then it would make it onto Fox News. And then it would be a story, because that Fox News talked about it. But Fox News basically washed the story. Still had no good sources. It was still nonsensical. The current example of this is the people stealing and eating people's pets, right? If you run it down, you can't run into any credible sources that are behind this thing. And yet, the former president of the United States, in a debate, gave it life. So there's a valid discussion to help people understand, here's the nonsense, or here's how this nonsense came to be. The problem, Angela, and I do this a fair amount, is A, it's exhausting. It does take up your time. You're not telling people other stories. So I couch it in terms of, let's say you're my viewer, Angela. Someone in your circle has been telling you that Haitian migrants are stealing and eating people's pets in Springfield. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to spend 3 minutes on helping you to have that argument if you have to. But it's a terrible use of my time and your time as my viewer to be doing this. So I don't know. I think you can spend your entire life swatting down social media.
And it distracts from the actual policies, right? People should be like asking the candidates about. Kadia, what do you think? Should we spend more time on it or less?
Listen, newsrooms that have the resources to do that, dedicate, you know, people, as you said, BuzzFeed, RIP, News we had a team of people, I used to work there, who, you know, it was very helpful, right? Especially to other reporters who kind of swatted down these theories or these online trips that would really be like sustained online. So it was beneficial for reporters, because we knew not to spend our time, and hopefully to people that were watching it. But it's exhausted. And, you know, even if I get pitches from different factions on something being, you know, fake or rooted in Russian disinformation, it's very difficult to prove. Like, that is a very exhaustive process. Yeah. And, you know, maybe you're right, and then like maybe 12 people read it. So it's one of those things newsrooms have to consider, just like, how do we cover, or how do we pat down some of the rhetoric that, you know, people, Trump and other people say when they're not telling the truth. It makes our jobs very difficult.
It does. And like you said, it's a matter of resources. Like having a team as part of your newsroom that just does disinformation, fact checking is an amazing thing to have, but we all don't have that. So something to think about in the future. The interesting thing about that Russian video too was they actually went back to old school, like they used actors and they didn't use AI. So I was like, yeah, AI, that big threat, the bogeyman, is not really working maybe the way some people thought it might. We're getting some more interesting audience questions. Someone is asking, are you confident that your vote is actually going to count? Like, is the counting going to be fair and accurate, given the Republicans have taken hold of a lot of the boards, the election boards in each state? Should people be concerned about that?
Well, I think there are two questions here. One is, if you live in a democracy, you should vote. Someone along the line fought very hard for your ability to vote, and not voting, it doesn't feel like a good piece of citizenship to me. That there are problems with how or whether your vote will be counted is very serious. In fact, in Jack Smith's charges against Donald Trump, that is the final charge. It is the final count, that he caused people to have doubt as to whether their vote mattered or would be counted. That's a very, very serious matter in a democracy. But I would also say there are issues. Definitely, there are going to be issues in Pennsylvania. There are definitely issues in Georgia. But by and large, most votes in this country get counted well, get counted efficiently. Places like Michigan have automatic audits all the time. And by the way, every time there's an audit, something is found, and they fix a system so that it gets tightened up, which is why we know immigrants are not, undocumented immigrants are not voting in any meaningful numbers. There are some who have been registered inadvertently because in local places in America, they allow some non-citizens to vote because they feel that's good for participation. And then sometimes those people go and they think they can vote in state or federal elections, but they can't. Whatever. The point is, generally speaking, the 2020 election was the safest election we have had yet. So you should not, if it's not that you shouldn't be concerned that your vote is imperiled, you should become a poll worker if you're concerned about that, or you should you should run on it. But it shouldn't affect your decision to vote. You should vote 100% of the time in every election that you can vote in, and then you should separately be concerned about the validity and the integrity of your vote.
Kadia, do you think this is a tactic for them to scare people away from the polls?
Sure, it is. As I mentioned before, sowing doubt in the election is, a tactic, and one that works. So no, you have to vote. Like, it's, as a Black woman who is old enough to have family members or to have met family members who didn't have the right to vote, I have to vote, right? Even there's controversy over whether or not reporters should actually vote, right? But I have to vote. But no, you should participate in the election process. It's a good democratic thing to do. You can't, condemn it and say, like, my vote doesn't matter if you're not participating in it.
Yeah, or even if the Republicans have stacked the boards, whatever, like, we have to hope that the courts somehow will, it'll all come out in the wash.
But
right?
There's give and take, right? Like, just how when people sow doubt, there was, whether it was if Democrats were in charge and Republicans took their issues to the court, the same is going to happen. Like, there's going to be a process where ultimately you understand that, okay, this is a fair election because both sides have fought about it and, taken it to court. This is our process.
That's the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I feel like so much of what we've talked about today, including this, comes down to bad actors exploiting people's belief that two things cannot be true at the same time. So when it comes to voting, for example, are there instances of voter fraud? Yes. Are they enough to tip an election in any direction? No. I mean, we are talking about numbers of cases that you would struggle to count on, that you'd need, more than one hand to count. The level of security, to Allie's point, that is there when it comes to voting, to making sure that people don't vote twice, but also to making sure that their vote is counted, is incredible. And to this idea that anybody could actually rig an election in this country, I mean, it's farcical. There is no National Election Commission. There's no Elections Canada in the United States, right? So every state and every county, there are thousands of counties that are individually running their own elections with different ballots and different ballot counting systems, and ballots that are sometimes 5 and 6 pages long because you are voting for so many things at the same time. And I think
so just because it's messy doesn't mean that it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Right, that is broken. That's exactly.
in many ways, the messiness is what makes it secure.
Right. Well, we have to tell that story. That's part of our job, right? So that people know.
Well, there's the other piece of this, Angela, where a whole lot of people in New York or California will say, my vote doesn't matter. And by the way, that works both ways, right? There are
Texas.
Right. So, but that's also not true, because in elections that, as Kadia says, it is now our system. These things are contested, but that's okay. We have rules for that too, in theory. Your vote matters. Because total vote counts actually matter. It may be that you're a Republican in Manhattan, but your vote actually does matter. And by the way, you get to vote for your governor, you get to vote for your attorney general, and you get to vote for all sorts of people.
We're not talking about any of those. Yeah.
The concept that your vote won't get counted is very serious. It's a democratic problem. But the concept that your vote doesn't matter because you are among people who vote for the other party is just bad citizenship on your part. You have to vote. It doesn't matter whether your guy's never going to win or is always going to win. You must go out and be part of that political process.
Good advice for all democracies, including our democracy here in Canada. Okay, well, we've hit 2 o'clock. So I'm going to thank our panelists, Ali, Jackson, and Kadia, very much for a great conversation. I'd love to sit around and keep going. Some point, maybe we'll revive it after the election and look at what happened. But it was great talking to you three.
Thank you all. This is a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much for hosting us.
To the CJF for being our wonderful hosts.